Good afternoon. Welcome to the Alpine JBF TMS versus WMS, which to implement first and why webinar, part of the WOW webinar series. Before we begin, a couple reminders. If you can please use the chat to submit your questions, and then the legal disclaimer. The information discussed in this session represents the views of the individuals and does not constitute legal advice or the views of Alpine. You should consult with your organization's leadership and legal counsel as needed for your specific situations. All right. My name is Landon Davies, Vice President of Sales here at Alpine. I'll be the moderator today. A little bit about me, industrial engineer by background, been in logistics for 22 years, worked in DCs all over the world. Most of my career has been inside the four walls. So enough about me. Let's go on to Greg and Brad. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
Greg, you want to start?
Sure. Thanks for joining, everybody. My name is Greg Utter. I'm one of the senior managing directors at Alpine. I've been in supply chain since I got out of college in the mid-'80s, so going on 40 years this year. Most of my time spent with applications like warehouse management, transportation management, labor management, anything really with an S on it. And I've been on both sides of the fence, both from a implementation standpoint as well as a sales standpoint. So very familiar with warehousing, distribution, and transportation. Just excited to get this going, and thanks for joining.
Thanks, Greg.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brad Forster, founder and CEO of JBF Consulting. I've got 30 years in transportation and transportation technology. I've worked as a carrier in a small parcel operations environment. I've worked as a shipper in a manufacturing operation, and I've spent many years in consulting. My first TMS implementation was in 1997. So I've seen a whole lot of different systems and platforms and been a part of many transportation implementations. So thank you, Alpine team, for inviting me to the webinar.
Glad to have you, Brad.
Appreciate it. So here's the agenda that we're going to go through today. Again, the topic TMS versus WMS, which to implement first and why. So we're going to go through an Alpine overview, a JBF overview, some talk around a decision criteria, why you're making this decision and the best way to approach it. Then I'm going to spend some time on the systems selection process. And today we're really focusing on WMS. Then Brad's going to take over and do the blueprint methodology for TMS. Then we're going to talk about integrations, why they're important, and then the key takeaways at the end. And again, as Landon mentioned, if you do have any questions, please utilize the chat icon. If they fit with the topic that we're talking about, we'll hit it then. If not, we'll pose them as questions at the end. So let's get started. So Alpine services, we've got a lot of services within the Alpine portfolio. We're really going to focus today on the supply chain systems practice side of it. We do a lot of things within there. I run that organization. It's justifications of systems, the requirements of those, selection process. We also do implementation support services, training, organizational change management, and anything to support those systems changes. So although we've got 4 strategic pillars, we're really focusing today on one, just the supply chain systems. Alpine at a glance, you can see that most of our staff is senior. We've been there, we've done that. We've got a lot of cycles under our belt. Right now, we've got 350 plus projects completed, all in supply chain, 130 plus amazing customers, and 40, give or take 40 plus or minus team members on the Alpine staff. So we're here to fill the gap wherever needed. So really, what does the supply chain systems practice incorporate? And we kind of go through this chain of events to come out with a completely positive and on time, on budget project. And it really starts with the system justification. Why do you need it, and what's it going to turn into when we're done? Then we go through a very diligent requirements definition. What do the requirements mean? We do the systems selection. That includes the pool of vendors that we're going to put into this mix for this project. I mentioned implementation support services after you've signed the contract and picked your solution. And then we also do post go live audit and support. Brad, I'm going to hand it over to you for the JBF overview.
Great. Thanks, Greg. So we've been around since 2003, so just 22 years as JBF Consulting. Very similar business and practice area to Alpine, with the distinction being we focus on transportation systems for shippers, right? So we have three essential practices, and very similar to Alpine, it is strategy. So the work that needs to get done in order to create a business case, define requirements, create the conceptual design, and vendor selection. And then it's systems integration and business integration of those systems into the business operations. And then it's everything that happens after the go live, support, stewardship, ongoing training, regression testing, cloud updates and upgrades, things like that happen on a regular recurring basis. We are very focused on North America shippers, but we do work with a number of North America shippers that have global operations. So obviously we're deploying these solutions globally. We are also very senior, most of our team with over 20 years of experience. And we deal with many facets of transportation technology, including private fleet, your normal, well-known transportation management systems, as well as multi-carrier parcel systems, real-time tracking and visibility tools. And occasionally we get into situations inside the DC with regards to yard management, dock and appointment scheduling, where we tend to work with companies like Alpine. So that's JBF in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you, Brad. I appreciate it. So the first part of it is, I'm going to hand it back to Brad, is the overall decision criteria and how I should start. Brad, why don't you kick it off?
Yeah, so I'll qualify this. The premise here is which one should we do first? And that kind of presumes that we can't do both simultaneously, right? And I think that both Alpine and JBF would agree that doing a TMS and WMS implementation at the same time is ideal. But for many reasons, sometimes companies can't do that. They already have a legacy WMS or they have a legacy TMS, and they need to either replace or add new. So in situations for a shipper or an enterprise company that may find yourself needing one but not the other, or needing both, which one should you do first and how do you decide? So here are three kind of key decision criteria that we've seen both Alpine and JBF across the years in terms of these are the essential decision criteria. First one is pretty obvious. We follow the money, right? So we prioritize either the TMS or the WMS, whichever is going to yield the greatest return on investment in the shortest period of time. That's always a great place to start. So if one has a very accelerated payback and it's a large dollar amount, typically clients will say, we'll do this one first because we can take the savings captured and then deploy that savings to fund ongoing phases or ongoing enhancements of that first phase rollout. So that's always a great place to start. The second decision criteria is pain point elimination, right? So it's either vitamins or painkillers. So if following the money is a vitamin, then eliminating the pain point or eliminating taking the painkiller is the second decision criteria. So if there is no ROI, which is not terribly uncommon for TMS and WMS, especially if it's a legacy system replacement that's end of life, there may not be any quantifiable benefit in some of these implementations or vendor selections. But in many cases, the implementation can eliminate a significant amount of pain points, whether it's labor in the warehouse or whether it's a lack of optimization or just we don't have anything that automates freight bill audit and payment. Some of those things are going to eliminate pain points. They could improve labor efficiency. They could also save some money at the same time as, streamlining operations, streamlining workflows, making day-to-day end user, kind of lives within supply chain easier. So this is a common number 2 criteria. And then we always want to look at item number 3, which are the actual constraints. So these are the things like, do we have people available? Do we have IT resources available? Will we need WMS and TMS business resources and subject matter expertise at a specific time? And are we in blackout? Are we in peak season? Is it end of fiscal period where our financial people or ERP updates can't happen? So we tend to take a constraint-based approach as the final decision criteria, and then we can decide which one makes sense to come first, the TMS or the WMS from an implementation perspective.
Thanks, Brett. I appreciate it. And I think what you'll see here is the theme, and you'll see it throughout the presentation, is a business case requirement, right? What is the business case? What's the yield going to be? What's my potential ROI? And then the discovery side of it, right? So you have to do your due diligence up front. And what happens oftentimes, and we see it a lot, is these happen in vacuums, right? So if you think about a lot of distribution companies, the transportation side of it is centralized, whereas the warehousing is decentralized, right? You've got distribution centers or warehouses or fulfillment centers somewhere on the planet or somewhere across the US, yet the TMS side of it is often centralized, and getting those parties together oftentimes is hard because they don't typically work together hand in glove day after day.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Brad. So just a quick overview of what Alpine does from the standpoint of a systems selection process. And we're really going to focus on what's in the red circle. For those of you who are colorblind, it's the first 2 blocks. And really, it's what we talked about earlier. You got to develop the problem statement. What is the need that you're trying to fill from the standpoint of a solution? Is it an upgrade? Is it a net new product? Is it a legacy system that's end of life? Is it a product that you own the asset for, but you went through an MVP implementation and you really didn't get your bang for the buck? So that identification of the need is the predecessor to the follow on. And the next one, if you've in fact identified that there is a need and determined that there is a need, then you have to develop the business case. And surprisingly enough, developing that business case can be daunting because you have to take into account several factors on what is going to go into the business case. Is it simply because you're end of life on your current solution and you don't have a choice where you're going to have to move to a new solution? Or is it something other where you're getting a new solution, but it's a technology lift? It's not necessarily a feature function lift. You're looking to lift your technology. And when that happens, usually the ROI is a little bit more extended because you're getting feature functions that are similar to what you're using today. So it's really a balancing act on how you come up with that business case, because if we're doing this the right way, when we're done and everybody shakes hand at the end, you want to have known that you've realized your metric of success. So it's very clear and important to talk about those up front and get them written, established, and then revisited as you go through. And then you have to think about the architecture, right? I know everybody's talking cloud, right? But there are still some applications and still customers out there who have requirements for, I'll just call it on-prem. For whatever reason, they need it to be on-prem. They don't have a good pipe for connectivity. So there's various reasons why they look one way or the other. And then lastly, the identification of the vendors. And this becomes important too, and we'll talk about it more in future slides, but the identification of those vendors when we're talking both WMS and TMS is a critical step to make sure that you're filling the right gap as opposed to just putting a name in a block for the vendor.
And Greg, going back, you mentioned an MVP implementation, and those are quite common, but maybe for people that don't know the acronym, can you tell us what that is?
Sure. So oftentimes a vendor and a customer will work hand in hand and talk about MVP, a most viable product, right? So they have a deadline on a spreadsheet of a project start date and a project end date or go live date. And they're working towards that end date and really aren't considering what their start date is. So as the project progresses, they will make decisions during that process that say, hey, I don't need necessarily this net new functionality. I'll just call them whiz bang technology to get the job done. So let's consider those that are not critical for the project to be successful as a phase two. Well, what we see oftentimes is that phase two comes and goes and it never happens. And they're not left with what they were sold, and they're not left with what they can get from a potential savings by utilizing the feature functions that are available in the solution that they adopted and they implemented. We see that a lot. I'm not an Alpine, and I'm assuming JBF, Brad can chime in, not opposed to an MVP implementation so long as you have the end in sight of what your real future state should be and you have it mapped to a timeline that everybody abides by. Thanks, Anna, for the question. Appreciate it. With that, Brad, I'm going to hand it to you for the JBF blueprint methodology, which is similar but a little different.
Yeah, and Greg, to your last comment regarding MVP, I agree. We do see some MVP approaches in terms of implementation on transportation systems. We're a little bit cautious though, because like you, we've been around for a while, and we warn clients that sometimes phase two never happens, right? So keeping the end in mind, getting something that is robust and substantial and truly defining what that minimum viable product is, that's good, but we still need to use some caution. So jumping into our blueprint process, we call the work necessary to do a systems justification, a vendor selection. We call this a blueprint because we inject a little bit of design up front. And the design is important for transportation systems before you even select a vendor, because transportation systems are a little bit different than WMS and some other enterprise kind of functional applications, in that they operate largely outside of the four walls of the enterprise. We're connecting with carriers, freight forwarders, drayage companies, customs brokers, pricing and weather, and a whole bunch of external systems to the enterprise. And these things become relevant because they guide us in terms of the integration complexity, and the integration requirements are a substantial driver to both the business case and the implementation timeline. So we invest a little bit of design time ahead of before we even select or talk about which vendors do we want to pick. And we also capture requirements no different than Alpine. And through that discovery workshop, we are essentially collecting all of the data points necessary to come to one of those three decision criteria. Are we developing a business case and we want to focus on starting this implementation based on following the money? Or are we eliminating pain points? If so, what are those pain points that we're eliminating, and can we quantify those? And third, we're looking at all of the constraints that could be barriers for us to get started, or they could become barriers during an implementation. And this is what we call kind of a readiness assessment. So as a way for us to collect all of those data inputs, we go through a relatively compressed, usually it's about 6 weeks of discovery, a little bit of design to get into a more precise business quantification, business benefit quantification. We do a readiness assessment essentially for people. Is the organization ready? Do we have subject matter experts available? Or are we moving from a completely outsourced transportation operation with a 3PL and we're insourcing it and we don't have the organization yet? Those things become key criteria. We've also advised clients to take 6 months before you do the vendor selection or before you begin to do an implementation to get your data ready, we'll say, hey, your item master or your locations are just, they need a lot of scrubbing. They need a lot of work. We shouldn't even get started, because if we start the implementation team is going to be doing that work. And it may present challenges. It could, push the timeline and things like that. So all of those things we capture, and then we move into vendor selection, vendor identification, negotiation of the contract. So very similar approach to the Alpine methodology for transportation systems.
Yeah. Thanks, Brad.
Greg and
There.
Brad, question for
Yep.
you guys. Let's say that I'm a customer and I decide to go out and do this assessment process on my own, and maybe I haven't done 24 of them in the last 2 years. What are the implications of choosing the wrong WMS or TMS?
Sure. I'll
Yeah.
take the first part of it. I don't know that there would be a reason that somebody would select the wrong one. I think they're more likely to select one that might provide more capabilities than they will ever use, and that oftentimes turns into spending more money than they needed to. So most often that's what we see. And we do come into projects where the selection has already been made and we're asked to make it fit, right? They buy the shoe before they've sized the foot. And we do that quite a bit. And usually what the outcome is, more often than not, thankfully, is they've bought too much, and don't need as much as what they bought. So we can deal with that. When it's the other way around, we start talking about changing a process that fundamentally should have been changed in the first place. So we don't see it an awful lot, Landon. I appreciate the question and I understand where it's coming from, but most often we're not seeing it being a degradation. Brad?
Yeah, I agree, Greg, with your overbuy, underbuy. We do see clients that have overbought where they use, let's say, anecdotally, 10 to 20% of the feature function of a large, tier one transportation system. Typically they pay for that. There's a little bit of kind of like lag, or there's certainly some overhead that they have to carry in terms of system bloat. They might still actually need to configure some things that are not applicable to that company, right? So perhaps the best way to say it is, if you overbuy, you're gonna push a bigger rock up the mountain every year instead of the right size rock to push up the mountain. But to your point, Greg, it's not necessarily a existential risk where it's like, that's the wrong solution, I've got to rip it out and select another one. However, the market has really changed here in the past, I would say, 5 years. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, there were really 3 transportation systems, and now there's probably 300, and they've specialized. And we do see clients that have let's say a complex transportation network that might have a mixture of private fleet asset usage, dedicated fleet asset usage, and contract for hire carrier. Maybe they do a mix of over the road domestic, and they do some imports and exports. And they will go to the Gartner Magic Quadrant, and they'll pick the top 3 leaders and realize that they have significant functional gaps because of their private fleet or because of their import-export operations. So really the work that we do, whether it's TMS or WMS, in terms of that requirements capture and discovery, it is really to essentially extract those differentiating requirements that make that company unique relative to the TMS vendor's feature function or overall capabilities. So that's that would be my perspective. It doesn't have to be a big risk or a big impact, but we've probably both seen them where it's like, yeah, well, you should go to a different platform.
Yep. Thanks. Appreciate it, Brad. And
Yeah.
one more for you, Brad.
Yeah, so the breadcrumb trail here is essentially through this blueprint process, we're essentially generating these four key pieces of output. And they are not just useful for vendor selection, right? These things aren't just all make work items that only get dropped into the RFP and then they're gone. They have no more useful life. They're actually implementation deliverables that carry on through the life of the implementation and even beyond, right? So if we think about those business requirements are perpetual representation of you as the business. And those things will be critical in terms of supporting the application. As your business changes, those requirements should change. Also, in a world today where everything is most transportation systems, by and large today, are cloud-based, if not cloud native, and they go through multiple updates and upgrade cycles per year. And you, as the buyer or owner of that subscription to a TMS, are required to maintain some level of parity in terms of the latest version release or enhancement from the TMS vendor. So those requirements become essentially testing and validation tools for you to say, do all of these things still work with the new upgraded system? It provides a basis for regression testing and essentially system validation. The conceptual designs carry forward into the implementation. The benefits identification really help us to anchor and make decisions in the case where things come up in the implementation, which they always do. We can go back to the benefits and say, if we let's say, remove this item out of scope, like freight audit and payment, or these reports in the dashboard, or my control tower. What does that do to the business case? So that business case can inform our decisions during the implementation. And the readiness assessment is essentially a really good starting point for organizational change management. And those are all very useful inputs into implementation. So think of it as a small insurance policy up front to make a more informed decision about vendor selection. And all of the work that we just did ports right over into implementation.
Yep. Very similar with WMS. A typical WMS selection is 3 to 4 months, depending upon how aggressive we want to be. And we'll identify some of these needs that are going to be required very early up front. And a perfect example, you said it earlier, is item master and location master, right? So if we go in on our initial visit and we find that their dimensional data is corrupt or not good, we tell them up front, hey, you have 3 to 4 months to correct these during this selection process to get them right in order for the implementation to go smoother. So very similar activities, very similar output that we use throughout the implementation process. So let's change gears a little bit and talk about integrations. And Brad, I'll let you lead it off.
Yeah. So in a lot of our work, even the projects that JBF has done side by side with Alpine, many of our clients coming into the implementation, or even before the vendor selection happens, they have a relatively simplistic view of what a WMS and TMS integration might look like. And we sketch this up just saying, here's what we think is a representation of how clients view TMS and WMS integration. But if we go to the next slide, the reality is the TMS and the WMS are very correlated in terms of operational constraints and system requirements. They are very correlated in terms of specific data handoffs that happen within the WMS to execute a transportation plan. And the transportation plan sometimes needs to know what actually happened in the warehouse for the TMS to make better decisions. So for anybody who's looking at a WMS TMS implementation, or you're currently in the integration mode, these are very common integrations between a TMS and a WMS. Things like, order management, and we'll get into this in greater detail here in a couple minutes. But the operational order flow of that demand essentially represents a key work stream, a key integration point between TMS and WMS. The shipment planning, obviously, the load tendering, anything that deals with the actual loading of the trailer or loading of staging of freight for LTL, parcel, etc. Anything that gets planned in TMS usually is being executed in the WMS. So there's just a natural synchronization and orchestration that needs to happen. And by and large today, this is all done through integration. Luckily, many, or if not most, of the TMS and the WMS that we work with are operating using a modern API architecture. So integration work today is a whole lot easier than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And we're also seeing a lot of advancement in terms of integration platform as a service, where many of these things are prepackaged or even available for the business users, the non-technical people, to actually connect the dots and build almost custom integrations without any IT labor. But this is a representation of normal TMS, WMS integrations. So think about a minimum viable product here for TMS, WMS. We can pretty much guarantee that there are going to be 4 to 5 integrations with the TMS and the WMS independently. And then we know the TMS has to hook up with a bunch of carriers and internal systems and financial systems, et cetera. So if we go to the next slide.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
back up one slide and just.
Oh, sure. Yep.
So when we're doing a WMS only project and we haven't introduced TMS, one of our early asks of the customer is, can you provide us with a technology topography map of some kind, so we know what kind of systems you're using today and what they look like? And oftentimes it will turn out to look like something like this. And then the other point on this slide is, for those of you who have gone through this or are going through this, when you're looking at TMS solutions and WMS solutions, holistically, there's a little bit of overlap in some cases on feature functionality. And one that stands out on this slide is the dock scheduling and yard management. There are several WMS providers out there who have pretty intuitive and pretty feature-rich dock scheduling and yard management, some a little less. And TMSs sometimes rely on the WMS to do the dock scheduling and yard management. So you really have to hone in on what is the best mixture if they have overlapping feature functions in order to meet your requirements from an integration standpoint, which is a perfect lead into this slide, Brad.
Yeah. So when we take that simple the simple map of what most clients coming into it think of a simple integration, this is actually a simple TMS implementation showing a WMS and a TMS and the client's host ERP system, and the integration is it's robust, but this is a rather simple client implementation of a transportation system, specifically a fleet routing and scheduling application. So we've seen actually far more complex integration maps when we finish the design, where we've seen upwards of 140 integrations into a TMS fleet management system platform. That's very complex. And this is why, before we even select the vendor or build the business case, we want to know the complexity that we're dealing with from an integration standpoint, because obviously it adds a lot of time, adds a lot of dollars to the costs, and those things are very meaningful when we're building the business case and justification for these implementations.
Yeah, and I know others on the phone have heard this. The long pole in the tent is integrations, right? And
yes,
there's much truth to that. And it's hard to just push data through and have it be effective and timely. So again, we kind of underscore this. Don't underestimate the complexity, because it's not as simple as just a few arrows going back and forth.
Yeah. So the other point of consideration here. So in this situation, should we do a TMS or a WMS first? Let's say that we're going to do them together simultaneously. Or if we're doing them independent of one another, one exists and we have to implement the other. You're going to come to this decision point at some point during your design. Should the TMS feed the WMS from an order workflow, an operational workflow standpoint, or should the WMS feed the TMS from an operational workflow standpoint? This came up in our, kind of our call preparation, and Greg and I, we wanted to talk about this because we think that this is really meaningful in terms of the broader context of the conversation. So we laid this out, and we really see kind of two primary options. The preferred option on the left is the discrete order flow. So if you're a shipper or you're a company that has an actual customer order, you could be a retailer, you could be a consumer packaged goods company, and you're shipping into a retail distribution center. You've probably got a discrete order, and that order is a representation of demand. Transportation systems want to take that transactional order and consolidate it to save money, right? We can take the next day or the overnight parcel system or parcel orders, and we can maybe merge those together with others into a bigger box, and we can LTL it, or we can take multiple LTLs and we can consolidate that into a multi-stop truckload. This requires the TMS to get a feed of orders so that it can do consolidation, so it can do cost savings and apply its optimization logic, and then pass over the optimized load plan to the WMS for execution. It then goes through its normal, wave planning or pick, pack, and ship, the actual workflow steps within the WMS that happen to get that order fulfilled and the product shipped out the door. So in this discrete order flow, we have a TMS that essentially is driving the process. The TMS orders come in and then they're passed over to the WMS. And that's the kind of the straight line order flow. This is what yields the greatest TMS ROI potential. However, it can impact things that happen in the WMS, like the timing in which we consolidate the orders could be problematic for WMS pick, or it could be problematic for WMS labor. We might want to orchestrate that in terms of, hey, not every order can drop on a Friday. We've got to smooth it out throughout the week. These are common requests and design requirements from our clients. And everything that we do within the TMS and we push that to the WMS begins to influence how and the timing of WMS downstream workflow operations. On the store replenishment side, the counterpoint to that is more common in a, let's say, a brick and mortar retail example, where I have stores and I just need to move replenishment orders or replenishment of inventory to those stores, but there's no discrete transaction that represents that order. We're essentially just saying we're going to replenish stores Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or we're going to replenish stores every Tuesday, every other Tuesday. Those are kind of like static outbound schedules. This is where we see clients choosing to move those order transactions into the WMS first, and then pass them over to the TMS with regards to what is actually shipped. And this is okay because in many cases, especially if you're a static outbound scheduled shipper, there's not a lot of savings potential in a TMS until it comes time maybe for freight audit and payment. So that is an acceptable design as well. But if you are actually taking customer orders and they're discrete orders, and you're moving that order flow into the WMS first before the TMS has an opportunity to do consolidation, then you are essentially removing any ROI, any savings potential from the TMS, because the WMS is going to short circuit the consolidation potential of the TMS. So that's just a kind of a critical design call out. And Greg and I were talking about this earlier, and we've got many examples from our years of doing this where we've seen it really become an impactful failure point where a TMS was essentially selected and implemented for cost savings, but the way that they designed it didn't yield any benefit because it went to the WMS first.
Yeah. And other real world examples, and it goes to the discrete order type, right? So you've got a robust TMS, you've got a robust WMS, and it all seems to work well, but your distribution center does not accommodate stage points, rows of stage points to hold pallets for sometimes 1 to 2 days to fill up the truck because you don't have any dock space to accommodate that. So they built the model for a transportation driven model to feed the WMS, but they can't leverage it because they don't have space on the dock. So we oftentimes will have that conversation up front, and it's which comes first. Is it your savings that you're wanting to get out of these software solutions that are very expensive to implement? Or is it, let's re-look at what your distribution center looks like and maybe do a layout first, change the staging sizes, change the aisle configurations in order to get the most robust bang for the buck out of the software that you're selecting. And we see this quite often. They bought what they think that they needed, but they didn't take into account all the other facets. Those come very early on in the requirements definition. It's not just about what feature functionality do I need in order to make my solutions robust and ROI ready. Do I have the infrastructure to support that is a really common theme that we see quite a bit. And this kind of also brings up another track that we've been asked about a lot. For those on the phone who are in the middle of this or starting this or getting ready to do it, what you'll find out there in the community of software solutions, Brad mentioned there used to be 3 primary, now there's 300 plus TMS providers. I would say essentially it's kind of the same on the WMS side, maybe not that dramatic, but you'll find that there are vendors out there who offer both solutions, right? Both WMS and TMS. So what is the decision point when you've got vendors that have both? And what I would suggest is you can look at them holistically and say, does this work? Or you can look at them individually and say, hey, do I need to buy a battleship TMS when a canoe will do? And the same to be said for a WMS. Do I need to buy a huge tier 1 WMS or can I get by with a tier 2, tier 3? And those are all based on the requirements. What the vendors will tell you is the ease of integration by having a solution on the same platform, WMS and TMS, makes your integration easier. And I would argue that there's some truth to that, but I would also argue that no matter what solution that you purchase, whether it's a vendor that has both or 2 different vendors, there's still integration that has to be had between the 2 solutions. No matter what the vendor tells you, there's still changes because no business is the same as the next. So there's always going to be work between those 2 integrations. So frankly, I'm not a technologist, but what they tell me is make the decision based upon the feature function and what you need out of the solution, as opposed to making the decision on sticking with a single provider, one hand to shake, whatever the reason behind that being. And Brad, I know you had some comments about that as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there is a case to be made with the let's say the vendors that have both a TMS and a WMS, and they might even say that we're on a single data model or a universal data model. But fundamentally, there is a benefit in terms of maybe easier integration. But the caution is you will only get that benefit of more packaged integration, or even they could claim there's no integration because these are actually the same tables in the same schema. But there are underneath the hood specific triggers, specific procedures that are firing here at the database level that are being designed by the vendor, right? And they're being coded by the vendor. So as long as you, the business, fits into that vendor's representation of how an integrated WMS and TMS design should look, you're good. But if you have any outlier requirements, then you might find that the prepackaged TMS WMS integration from that single vendor is actually more difficult to unwire and customize than it would have been if you just went with a best of breed TMS and WMS in the first place. So do your homework. The requirements really matter.
Yeah. Thanks, Brad. I appreciate it.
Yep.
So I'm going to wrap it up just kind of reviewing the summary of the key takeaways. Number one, the prioritization framework, right? Figure out what the clear criteria is on whether TMS or WMS should come first based upon your operational needs. I think we mentioned very early on, Brad and I agree completely that if you have the opportunity to implement both simultaneously, and that doesn't necessarily mean turn on, go live on the same day for both solutions, but wrapping those around one another when you're going through the requirements, when you have your TMS people and your WMS people and your IT people and your business people in the same room at the same time, it shortcuts a lot of questions and answers that will happen later. The next is the strategic sequencing, right? Discover the framework for aligning the rollouts with your business goals. So as I mentioned, a lot of times the TMS will be a centralized operation in one building, one place, run by a TMS group, and the WMSs are decentralized, right? So prioritize, if you do have a multi-distribution center network, what comes first, what comes second, what comes third, and why. And then third, the integration readiness. So understanding the integration points is very, very important, but you also have to understand what is my data flow going to look like between systems, and that comes down to that eye chart of arrows pointing back and forth. You'll find if you do your diligence up front, there are systems that are out there that not everybody within the organization even knows they exist. It could be payroll, it could be time and attendance, it could be labor, it could be any number of solutions that live out there that have connectivity that most people weren't aware of within the company. We see that quite a bit. And then the last one, the investment confidence, right? Are you confident that you are getting the ROI that you should get? Make sure that you define those metrics of success up front. So when you hit your target date and somebody from a C level says, hey, did you meet your requirements? Did you meet your metrics of success? Make sure you have an answer for that and have the background to make that decision. Future-proofing the technology investments, right? So what technology are you going to look at? What are you talking about from an integration tool? Brad mentioned, using APIs, the things that are more natural. But if you don't have an integration policy, if you don't have an integration tool, make sure that you understand what your options are, whether it's a Boomi or a MuleSoft or some other integration platform to make the systems talk back and forth with one another. So I'm going to hand it back to Landon real quick.
If you guys have any questions, type them in the chat. I'll read off the one that's in there. You mentioned earlier, Greg, the MVP approach. When you do take an MVP approach, do you recommend budgeting for phase 2 from the beginning so that you've got that money and it's more likely that phase 2 will happen?
Yeah, best case scenario, if you are considering an MVP approach, that's part of our design strategy and methodology. And it's a 10-point methodology. And one of them that's very clear is plan for the unexpected and plan for your phase 2. Because like I said, it's okay to walk into a project with an MVP approach as long as you're getting what you need out of the solution from your phase 1. And then future phases, you turn on the more whiz-bang technology, I'll just call it. Make sure that you've planned for those with a date, a due date, a who, and the dollar that's needed, because it's very hard to go back to the till for more money once you've started a project than it is to get it initially when you have it up front and just bank it for future projects.
All right, thanks, Greg. I don't see any more questions. If anybody's got any, type them in. I'll throw one more out there. I thought this slide on which to do first was really good. If the sky's the limit and money's no object, it sounds like the answer is the best is to do them together. As most people don't operate in that world, How do you make the decision WMS or TMS first when money is a consideration?
Yeah, if money is a constraint, and it often is, then I think you either are going to take a vitamin or a painkiller, right? Are we going for return on investment, or are we going for what eases the pain or smooths out the operations? I think those are the two fundamental drivers. If everything else is a similar constraint, then it's either the money or the pain point removal.
I agree 100%, Brad.
Okay. Well, if there's no questions, thank you everybody for joining us today. Next one, July 23rd, 2025. We'll be talking about building efficiency, the importance of a solid facility layout and distribution. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.